Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are, because we have participants in today's event from all over the world. I'm Dick Morningstar, the founding chairman of the Global Energy Center of the Atlantic Council, and I want to welcome you to what's very exciting for us, the launch of our final report and recommendations on European energy security and the critical role of transatlantic energy cooperation. We have a huge audience from all over the world. And before going further, I want to thank very much the Smith Richardson Foundation for their generous support for this project, which has lasted now for almost an hour and a half. I also want to thank my co-author and investigator, Andras Shemini, former Hungarian ambassador to the United States and to NATO, as well as Olga Kakova and Jennifer Gordon from the Atlantic Council, who have contributed hugely to this report. A few administrative details first. Please follow the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center today and in general on Twitter at AC Global Energy. To ask questions, which we will get to towards the end of the program, you can use the Q&A icon on your screen. It's really terrific. We have just a remarkable group of experts and speakers and panelists today. We're going to start with keynote remarks from Eugene Howard, who since last fall has been the Director General of the Energy Directorate at the European Commission. And by the way, the full biographies are attached to the last reminder that you got for this event. Dita's remarks will be followed by remarks from Frank Fannin, who is the first confirmed Assistant Secretary of State for the Energy Resources Bureau. Then Ted Garish, who's the Assistant Secretary of Energy for International Affairs. I'll then have a brief conversation with them, and then we'll have an expert panel that will include Klaus-Dieter Borchardt, who knows more about European energy in one finger than I know in my whole self, who's the Deputy Director General of the Energy Directorate. Chris Smith, Senior Vice President of Cheniere Energy Incorporated, who representing the private sector, which is so important to what we're doing, and Eugene Howard, who is the economist and head of the Electricity Network Division of the European Investment Bank. And working together on electrification will also be important. To set a context, I want to briefly describe what I think are the key takeaways from the report that we're launching today. Then Andras will make some very brief comments. First and foremost, we believe that transatlantic cooperation is essential to energy security. The US and Europe have a strong interest in each other's energy security because energy security relates to economic security and relates as well to political security. The second point I would make is that the elephant in the room is COVID-19. And the US and Europe should coordinate on responses to COVID-19 through policy and through stimulus with the twin goals of energy security and decarbonization. It's my understanding that green recovery is a major part of the recovery plan, which the EU announced yesterday and which Didier Jurgensen will be talking about in a few moments. Third point, it will be important for us to continue to work together to continue to develop competitive and transparent markets in Europe, to reduce dependence that some countries have on a dominant supplier, particularly Russia. Gas will continue to be important for the foreseeable future. We need to work together to continue to develop alternative routes and sources, including LNG, supply of liquefied natural gas. We need to work together to develop infrastructure in parts of Europe, and we can do this in coordination with the 3Cs initiative and the Partnership for Transatlantic Energy Cooperation, which I know Ted Garish will be talking about. We also should take advantage, we believe, of a joint financing strategy, and we have the ability to do so now that $1 billion has been appropriated to the new U.S. Development Finance Corporation for projects in Central and Eastern Europe. That $1 billion can be used for direct investment. It can be used for project finance guarantees, which would leverage that far beyond the $1 billion amount. So we need to work on that. Fourth, and I think really important, is the opportunity for the US, the EU, and the private sector to cooperate on the development of new technologies, including in such areas as hydrogen, artificial intelligence, and digitalization, particularly in the electrification area. And I'll say new nuclear technology, such as small modular reactors, which I think could be very important to meeting climate goals. So not only, and also another point to, I think, very important, not only will clean technologies reduce emissions, but it's also critical to energy security because it will reduce the dependence, for example, on dominant suppliers. So it can help meeting climate goals while at the same time ensuring a sufficient and affordable supply of energy. The fifth point that I'll make is that at the same time, we need to work with the private sector, and Chris Smith can talk about this, to reduce methane emissions, to make progress with respect to carbon capture. And I think it's important that we don't demonize the private sector, but recognize that the private sector has some of the solutions, a lot of the solutions as well, and recognizes that it has to change over the coming transition. And related, this will allow us to cooperate on the European Green Deal from the standpoint of new technologies, and also to collect the necessary objective and transparent data that would allow for a non-discriminatory carbon adjustment mechanism, which would be part of the Green Deal, and is something that could create a lot of problems unless we work together to make sure that it's done right and done in a non-discriminatory manner. Last 2 points, we need to cooperate, as always, on geopolitical and on geoeconomic issues. That includes typical geopolitical issues that we are always dealing with, but also on things like the supply chain, dealing with China, dealing in Africa and other parts of the world. And finally, we make the point that it's important, this has to be coordinated somehow, and that this should be done with a reinvigorated US-EU Energy Council, or as in Europe they say, EU-US Energy Council, and no better people to think about that than our 3 initial speakers, who are the people who operationally will be able, hopefully, to see that that takes place. With those initial comments, let me ask Andras to make some very brief comments.
Thank you, Ambassador. First, I also want to thank Director General Jönsson, Deputy Director Borchardt, and Assistant Secretaries Garish and Fannin for your leadership. You are the custodians of a strong EU-US energy cooperation. When we began our work on this report in 2018, COVID-19 was nowhere in sight, now upsetting the world. However, we at the Atlantic Council are convinced that most of our findings will withstand the test of time as we face the daunting challenge of recovery. But now we must add, if we are to succeed in our economic and social recovery, there is no alternative to the EU and the US holding hands, deepening their cooperation, meeting the dual challenges of energy security and climate goals together head on. I hope this report will be seen as a catalyst, as a platform to come up with new, bold ideas across the Atlantic. One final comment. Dick Morningstar said it, but it cannot be said enough. We must see business as part of the solution, encourage and urge business leaders to look boldly to strike a balance between their business interests and climate goals, be innovative guardians of the environment. With this, I want to thank you very much. It has been an honor to work on this project, and I very much look forward to a great conversation.
Thank you very much, Andras. And now I would like to turn the floor over to Dita Juhl-Jørgensen for your keynote remarks. And I know that you'll tell us about what the green recovery means in the context of the overall European recovery and how you think we can best cooperate.
Thank you very much, Dick, Ambassador Morningstar. Thank you very much, Andras. It's very nice to see both of you again. And thank you also very much to the staff at Atlantic Council for organizing this timely event. You seem to always find the right time to organize the right event. So I much appreciate that. Also, warm greetings to Assistant Secretary Garish and Assistant Secretary Fannin. I'm glad that I had the opportunity to travel to Washington just before most of the global travel lockdown, as did Klaus-Dieter a few weeks after that. So we both had the opportunity to see you all and to visit Atlantic Council. So I'm grateful for that, but also grateful for this opportunity. Also, hello to everyone who's tuning in from far away. My apologies to those who have to get up very early or stay awake very late. We're lucky here in Europe. It's early afternoon, and so we're well placed in this time zone context today. We live in strange times. We have in Europe been in lockdown more, or in Belgium certainly, lockdown more or less, or confinement as we call it, more or less 11 weeks. And I seem to spend all of my days talking to a lot of people, more people than I would probably normally do, but I don't meet anyone all day. We're getting used to it, but I do look forward to actually seeing people in person. As I said, I would like to pay tribute to the Atlantic Council for the hard work in preparing the report. It's an excellent report and a timely one. I've not been able to delve into the details of it, but my colleagues are studying it, and I will be doing that as well over the coming weeks. I think it's an excellent and very useful basis for strengthening of the transatlantic cooperation, and I think that is an objective we can all agree on. As you've said, Dick and Andras, that is an important part of our shared future, both for energy security, but also broader geopolitical and transition issues. What I would like to do is to come up with a number of, with commenting on some of the main elements that are raised in the report. And then, as you said, I would like to bring you up to date on some of the main developments, the recent developments in Brussels, in particular the recovery package that was adopted yesterday. And then Klaus-Dieter will be joining the panel, and he will cover the parts that I'm leaving out in my short comments this morning or this afternoon. So first of all, on the report, I very much appreciate that it identifies concrete and operational ways of strengthening our EU-US cooperation in key areas. I think what we've been seeing over the last decade is that our cooperation in the field of energy policy has been close, and we have a number of actual successes to prove that. The most recent and a very important success, as you probably all know, is in the area of LNG, where the US has become the main supplier of the European Union, and the European Union is the main export market of the US, thanks to good cooperation both in the market, but also very much in the regulatory and international trade field. So a good example of what we can do when we work closely together. And for the European Union, and we've talked about this before, Dick, a significant contribution to the diversification of our energy supply, and hence improving both the competitiveness in the European market, but also very much our energy security. So an important development thanks to this close cooperation. And I think it's fair to say that that specific success would not have happened without the work under the US-EU Energy Council and the business-to-business events that we have hosted, both on LNG, but of course also on other topics. So we look forward here in Brussels and throughout Europe to a continued strong cooperation with the United States, including in the US-EU Energy Council. And we're also open and would be ready to look at organizing further business-to-business events in future. We have other areas where we here see a very significant potential for close cooperation, including technology and cooperation. You mentioned some of them, Dick, in your introductory remarks: the digitalization, artificial intelligence. We have energy efficiency. We have developments in relation to smart meters, batteries, carbon capture, which you also mentioned. We're looking at hydrogen. We've, of course, got our ITER projects and small modular reactors, just to mention some of the innovative technologies where we see scope for closer cooperation across the Atlantic. Then we've got the issue of sustainable finance, where we see a need to pool both public-private funding to finance our investment needs, and where I think we can also strengthen our cooperation across the Atlantic. So all those remarks and all this analysis is very pertinent and welcome. Of course, I'm also happy to see that the report recognizes the need for cooperation and coordination when it comes to the implementation of the European Green Deal. We talked about the Green Deal when I was in Washington in February, and as you will know, it's the main political priority of the Ursula von der Leyen Commission. It was presented at the end of last year and is essentially a growth strategy that aims to transform our European economy and our European energy system into a modern, resource-efficient and competitive economy. We started on this before the coronavirus hit all of us. We had set out this growth plan, as I said, at the end of last year, which is essentially a strategy that encompasses all parts of the European economy to bring them together for a strengthened growth, strengthened investment, job creation, and all of that working towards a carbon neutral European economy by 2050. The energy system is absolutely essential in that. The easiest way to explain it is that 75% of our greenhouse gas emissions in Europe come from either energy production or energy consumption. And so it's clear to lower our greenhouse gas emissions, we need to look at energy policy, energy production, and energy consumption. And that is what we're doing. It's not only about energy, as I said, it cuts across all sectors of the economy. We're looking also, of course, within the field of climate policy, industrial strategy, and a number of other aspects of the European economy. From an energy policy perspective, I would just point to some of the key elements of the Green Deal, which are also highly relevant in the recovery package that I will come to in a second. Now, in the field of energy policy, some of the most important elements that I would mention is the energy efficiency of buildings. We hope to launch a renovation wave for buildings, simply because the European building mass, the building infrastructure, is one of the most energy inefficient sectors in the economy and represents a very significant part of our energy consumption. We're also looking to strengthening and upgrading our energy infrastructure. We would do that, first of all, by revising and updating the rules for the trans-European energy networks, mainly to encourage cross-border infrastructure investment, which is in line with the long-term decarbonization strategy, but again, also, of course, for energy security throughout Europe and the strengthening of the internal market for affordable energy across Europe. One of the big initiatives that we will bring out very soon is that of energy system integration, also known as sector integration, which is an initiative that should come out in late June, where we're looking at how do we get all the different sectors of the energy system to work together across different sources of energy and across different energy consumers, essentially aiming to boost our industrial competitiveness, but also to boost innovation and the efficiency of the system. As part of the energy system integration, we're looking at hydrogen as a potential significant energy carrier in a future system, and one that can bring together electricity and gas and can help to decarbonize some of the sectors where that is otherwise difficult within the current frameworks. And then when it comes to power generation, we're of course looking at renewables, including offshore energy, where we're working on a strategy to boost the take-up of offshore wind and tidal energy by better coordination across Europe and among member states in regional cooperation. So those are the key energy aspects of the Green Deal. As you know, because I've been there and talked to you, I can speak many hours about it, but there's no time this morning, so that's the shorter version. I would like to move on to the recovery package, which was adopted by the Commission yesterday, presented in the European Parliament and presented in the press, and which is a very impressive and historic document because it brings to European level a lot of the investment and cohesion initiatives that will be necessary to bring us out of the current crisis brought about by COVID-19. So the Green Deal is not new, but since we adopted the Green Deal in December, a lot has happened in our economic and social and political landscape. A lot has happened in markets, and a lot has happened in energy markets. And so what have been looking at, just as you have on the other side of the Atlantic, is, well, how do we handle this crisis? And the European Recovery Package, which was outlined by the President yesterday, is our key answer to that at European level. It's clear that in order to address this very significant crisis, we need to work together at European level. We are better addressing it together than if each member state tries to do it individually. It's also clear that in order to do that, we need to facilitate investment across Europe, both public and private investment. And we need to do that in the most efficient way possible, and in a way that brings in all European regions and sectors, and one that will accelerate the ongoing digital transformation, but also the transformation or the transition towards a carbon-free economy, and in a way that strengthens our resilience. I think you mentioned resilience as well in the introduction, and that is a key consideration in going forward, also based on the lessons learned in the current crisis. And so the clean energy transition and the Green Deal, of course, are a cornerstone of the recovery, but together with digital and together with these economic resilience considerations as well. In practical terms, just a bit of the numbers, and I know it's always difficult to use numbers in a speech because people tend to forget them afterwards, but it is quite an impressive package that was presented. There is a new recovery instrument, which is called Next Generation EU, in recognition of the fact that the next generation of Europeans will pay for this crisis. And so let's make sure that we create the instruments that will help bring growth and jobs and will help make that happen. That is based on grants worth 500 billion euro, loans 250 billion. So together 750 billion euro in the next 4 years for this recovery instrument, Next Generation EU. That comes in addition to the long-term EU budget, which is worth 1.1 trillion euro. It's a 7-year budget, which has been revamped to better focus on the economic recovery that we are having to address now. And it comes together, of course, with other instruments. There are some safety nets. There's 540 billion euro in loans that is already agreed by Council and the European Parliament. And there's so all of this together brings us to 2.4 trillion euro, quite an impressive amount. And as I said, really historic and unprecedented. Now, the interesting thing is, of course, both the instruments themselves and these new mechanisms we have built up, but also how will it be spent? And that's relevant also very much in the energy context, and I think also of transatlantic interest. So not all the details have been established yet, and a lot of that will, of course, depend on discussions in Council among member states and also with the European Parliament, but also depend on how national governments design their recovery. Where will they put the focus? What are the specific regional or national needs? So there's still some scope for shaping that in the coming months here in Europe. A lot of it will be spent, as I said, through this recovery and resilience, a facility specific to recovery and resilience, which aims to support investment and reforms. And that includes, of course, investment linked to the green transition, and projects, for example, identified by member states in their national energy and climate plans. There will also be a significant boost or upscaling in what we call the Just Transition Fund, so the fund that aims at helping those regions that would need to transition out of, for example, coal mining, to help reskilling and building programs to support investments in those regions. That will be increased to 40 billion euro if this Commission proposal goes through. We also have a new strategic investment facility, which will use 15 billion euro of public funds to leverage private investments, because we need significant private investments. And I fully agree with you as regards to the role of the private sector, which is absolutely essential, both in our energy system, our security, but also very much in having functioning markets and for investments in the recovery and beyond. And then we will also be increasing our Horizon Europe research efforts, so for new technology in the digital and green transition, up to 94 billion euros. So that was a lot of numbers, and impressive numbers, because we are talking in trillions, and as I said, really historic levels at European level. these are the main elements of the recovery package, which, as I said, is digital, green, and resilient, and aims to create a digital, green, and resilient future, and which where we see the European energy policy, the European energy sector, and our international energy cooperation as being really core elements of this package. So coming to my concluding remarks, Dick, I hope I haven't gone over time in my statement, but just to recall once again, the world is very different now than it was when I started my job back in August last year, different even from when I visited you in Washington in February. We have been on confinement for more than 2 months. The restrictions are easing up, but the COVID concerns and the crisis brought about by COVID is here and will be with us for a foreseeable future, as well as some of the changes to our way of life. And so we have to adapt and become resilient also in this context. Having said that, a number of the challenges that we face have not changed with COVID. And so I think a lot of the proposals, the initiatives, the strategy we have established for ourselves, the objectives we've established remain entirely valid. For example, we need secure energy supply. For that, we need competitive energy markets, we need open markets, and we need global markets. For that, we need international cooperation. And of course, we need the green energy transition and innovation and technology, as you have also pointed to. And we need to remain open for imports. And again, I mentioned LNG in my opening as a very good example of how that has helped us diversify and become more energy secure while benefiting from competitively priced energy sourcing. We remain the world's largest importer of both crude oil, natural gas, and coal, and that's not going to change overnight. We're at the beginning of a longer transition. So your recommendations, Dick and Andras, I think are highly relevant and timely. I think we need to work together between the European Union and the United States to reinforce energy security, develop our infrastructure, and help encourage the clean energy generation to reduce emissions globally. I think we both need to stimulate investment. I also hope that we could continue and strengthen our cooperation at international level to leverage opportunities for energy diplomacy together, working with others as well, between us, but also in other groupings and international multilateral fora. We've talked about, you mentioned some of those as well. And then we need to work together, as you also said, on digital technology, which is part of our transition and our recovery plan. It's making the world smaller, and thank God for that now in these days where we're in confinement in many places. That allows us to meet at least in this way and to communicate in this way. And as I said, I'm grateful that is possible. So all in all, I am very optimistic and engaged in strengthening the transatlantic energy cooperation. I very much look forward to hearing colleagues from Department of Energy and Department of State to hear how you see this going forward. And thank you very much again for the opportunity, Dick.
And thank you very much, Dita, for an excellent review of the situation, and sets a good backdrop for the comments from Assistant Secretaries Fannin and Garish. So let me turn it over to Assistant Secretary Frank Fannin for your comments or remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador, and thank you for the team for organizing this event, the work on the paper, of course, at the State Department, and you know this well, Dick, that we engage in these issues not as a technical matter. We're not a technical agency, but really as a matter of foreign policy, where the overall energy issues really are a proxy for those foreign policy issues. Director General Yul Jorgensen's comments outline a number of ways that the U.S. and EU energy security are mutually reinforcing and beneficial, and certainly the opportunities that taking the opportunity out of the current crisis. Of course, no one knows what the post-pandemic global economy will look like, but we do know that once we do leave our homes and get back to work, we're going to need energy and more of it to reinvigorate our economies. In order to meet that challenge, it's crucial that we continue to strengthen regulatory environments, expand transparent and competitive energy trade, and as the Director General spoke to, and as you did as well, kind of harnessing this new energy innovation that's happening, but also importantly to manage the responsible extraction and ensuring that we have reliable supply chains for the resources that feed into these clean energy technologies. I know the paper speaks to many of these issues, and we very much look forward to diving into those in greater detail. The European Green Deal presents a wide-ranging and ambitious set of proposals that demonstrates the Commission's drive to innovate and its efforts to find new ways to meet Europe's energy challenges. And we share the common goals in promoting energy security and supply diversity in Europe. I believe our efforts to provide alternative sources and types of energy are improving energy security. Above all, we encourage transparency and consistency as the EU continues to look to implement the Green Deal, and I think you spoke to that, and the report speaks to this, Ambassador. Well, the last thing anyone wants to see is for there to be additional tariffs or regulations that could limit the robust energy trade that is really creating beneficial outcomes for both the United States and for Europe. We're also shared leaders in renewable energy and energy storage, nuclear technologies, including small modular reactors, which was spoken about, carbon capture, utilization, storage, all of which can help Europe reach its goals. The United States stands ready to continue to work bilaterally as well as multilaterally on these complicated issues. But beyond the Green Deal, I think it's important to note the US government's ongoing efforts to support transatlantic energy security. Energy dependence, as we know, creates political vulnerability. This is why successive administrations have looked to work with the EU to improve energy security and avoid situations where our friends and partners are beholden to those who seek to use energy for non-market, for coercive ends. The Southern Gas Corridor is a great example of sustained energy diplomacy built on shared values. It's a consequential year for the Southern Gas Corridor, which saw another milestone recently when the Transadriatic Pipeline, or TAP, began importing natural gas from the Caspian through the last section of the pipeline in Greece as a system test. The Italian portion of TAP is scheduled for completion and operation by the end of this year. And Ambassador Morningstar, you know these issues well. You had a formative hand in the foundation of some of that work and the realization today. But I think it's also important to recognize where we were then and how things have changed to where we are today. We'll speak to three of them. First, the United States today, unlike then, has energy to share with the world and is seeking partnerships with like-minded countries. You already spoke to the critical role that US LNG is providing for the world and Europe in particular. And it's pleased to hear Chris Smith speaking later, the role that his company is playing and others in the industry. Second, we see new energy sources proximate to Europe, such as in the Eastern Mediterranean, which are enabling new energy potential for new optionality for Europe. And the Secretary of State has spent considerable time on this and created a new forum regarding the 3+1 to look at these issues in detail. I know that we look forward to speaking about that more later. Third, these new energy technologies are bringing a new frontier, a fertile ground for cooperation with the EU. It's important to remain mindful of how the raw materials and ensure that we have resilient, stable, and secure supply chains, and that the governance conditions on how these are extracted that are continue to be advanced at the highest values, highest levels. But yet challenges certainly do remain. There still remains a propensity for malign actors to use energy as a coercive tool. And this propensity has only increased even in the face of critically important partnership and reforms advanced by the Commission. We see these playing out in the papers today. This is all reasons why we need to continue the cooperation with our allies in Europe. We also can do more in addressing some of these energy islands where there lack sufficient optionality, such as in, we talked about the three Cs, but also in the Balkans regions, where it's why we continue to advocate for new gas infrastructure that would create that optionality. Some of those include the interconnector Greece-Bulgaria, the Alexandropoli FSRU. In Croatia, we've been long supporting the Kirk Island project, a project of common interest. But last, I just want to recognize what some of all already have recognized as well, which is that our work as governments is to create frameworks, policy, laying the groundwork, but it's really the implementers are the private sector. And the US private sector is the best in the world. And importantly, unlike some others, our companies not just bring the best technology, innovation, health, safety, environmental records, but they respect the sovereignty of the countries in which they partner and in which they operate. I think that's a critically important message, and I look forward to the rest of the panel discussion. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you very much, Frank, for your remarks. And your remarks emphasize, and I know Assistant Secretary Garish's remarks will also emphasize that with respect to at least international energy security issues, that's really been has had a bipartisan approach going back as long as when I got started in this area back in the 90s. And it really hasn't changed. And I think that both the State Department and the Department of Energy have continued that. And Assistant Secretary Garish, Ted, I'm sure you'll talk about some of your initiatives on the Partnership for Transatlantic Energy Cooperation, which also has bipartisan support and can be very helpful in the energy security area. So I'll turn to you, Assistant Secretary Garish.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Morningstar. It's a pleasure to be here virtually with the Atlantic Council and all of the people around the world that are listening today to your important work. I would like to also thank Director General Jorgensen for her very insightful comments. And I think about her visit recently in February. It was probably one of our last visits, and we're hoping that we'll be able to do more of that in the future. I'd like to do two things today, if I could, and one is to talk a little bit about the Partnership for Transatlantic Energy Cooperation, known affectionately as PTEC. And then I would like to maybe address some of the areas where I think we can focus some of the things that were included in your report, where it would be useful for everyone to maybe spend a little extra time. First, I'd just like to say that the Partnership for Transatlantic Energy Cooperation is an ideal organization to implement the next steps required in working with 3 Cs and the EU on the very important energy pillars that we need to go forward. It was designed to be the energy pillar for the 3 Cs initiative. And it, in turn, is made up of 4 pillars. And let me just talk about some of the very important work that we've been able to accomplish thus far. One of the first groups is the Critical Energy Infrastructure Working Group. And they are currently actively developing an electricity model to assure the desynchronization of the Baltics and the integration into the European grid, an extremely important project. They're assisting also with cybersecurity training and workshops on gas, also to protect the gas infrastructure. The second important working group is security of supply, which deals a lot with gas supplies throughout Europe. And one of the very interesting projects that they're working on now is an area that I know that Frank Fannin has been interested in, and that is small-scale LNG in the Balkans. And we are working right now with the U.S. Energy Association on developing a study as to how that could proceed in the future. A third area, excuse me, is the energy efficiency and renewable energy. And we are working to open markets and remove barriers to entry in that particular area. One fascinating study that I know that was mentioned, and that's in the area of hydrogen that the Director General referred to, where we are attempting to deal with hydrogen and fuel cells, dealing with the difficulties of transporting hydrogen in natural gas pipelines. This is a highly technical issue, and we are working, and this is a very diligent area in the renewable area for the future. And the last working group relates to nuclear energy, and we are dealing with the taxonomy questions for nuclear. And as you know, we believe that nuclear needs to be treated like other clean energy sources, and to include it in the clean air incentive and allowing for the financing of future nuclear projects. We've made extremely important progress on PTEC, and some of the working groups have met virtually in the last couple of weeks, and 2 more are planning to meet within this next month. And so the work that we have begun has made some real progress, and we're looking forward to considerably more in the future. I'd like to, if I could, just turn for a minute to the areas there where we really see future cooperation, and some of this has been discussed by the previous speakers. So let me just kind of emphasize some of these that I think are particularly important going forward. One in the area, especially of natural gas, is maximizing transportation routes and sources for gas, interconnections throughout Europe. And I know that the EU has been very interested in these projects, and we have been working diligently to see them going forward. And that was one of the parts of the report that I think needs to continue. Grid activities, I think, are extremely important. Desynchronization of the Baltics and cyber protection for the grid, and similarly on gas infrastructure. Those are some issues that really need further work. I'd like to emphasize the importance of nuclear going forward. Meeting climate goals. We need to work to resolve these taxonomy issues on sustainable finance, which has excluded nuclear from these green investments. I should point out that the International Energy Agency studies have shown that countries around the world and in the EU will never meet their climate goals without the contribution of nuclear. The IEA has also shown the disadvantages of closing nuclear plants, and this has occurred in some countries around the world. Nuclear relicensing and extension of existing plants are right now the cheapest form of electricity available, and needs to be considered moving forward. The fourth area is CCUS. Atlantic Council's support for this important technology is important, and you have made it a part of your report, and we think that it's very important for all fuels and all technologies to continue in the future, and CCUS is a mechanism to make that happen. And then finally, cooperation on funding for future infrastructure projects, like the projects of common interest. We need to cooperate on the prioritization of the projects that are being considered and work with XM and DFC, the New Development Finance Corporation, to make it possible in coordinating with European funding mechanisms. So we think these are some of the very important issues going forward that we would like to emphasize today. I'd also like to mention several people have indicated the importance of industry and government working together in partnerships, and we think that that is extremely important here. And the events that have occurred with the EU on small modular reactors and gas infrastructure that occurred over the last year or two have been tremendous successes and need to continue. So we have seen tremendous success already underway, and there's really much more to come. and I'm optimistic about the real progress that we have begun and the advantages for the future. So it's an honor to have been with you today, and happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Assistant Secretary Garish, Ted. Those were really excellent comments. And I think between the remarks from the three of you, we covered one way or another, almost all of the points that are in the report. Obviously, the report has much more detail. And what it shows is that, in spite of some issues that maybe there have been in the last few years and I don't want to get into sanctions debates and things like that, but there's been much more to agree on than we disagree on, and a huge amount that we can cooperate on. Let me just, and we are running somewhat behind on time, so hopefully you'll all be able to stay over the 9:15 mark to as late as 9:30 if the conversation continues. But I want to ask the three of you a little bit more about the Energy Council. Back in the days when I was involved, we did very well on the geopolitical side. We had a geopolitical working group. We were totally in sync, the US and the EU, on issues like Ukraine, on the Southern Gas Corridor, and the like. Where there was a weakness at that time, and I have not been directly involved, obviously, in the last 5 or 6 years, at that time anyway, was on the research and technology side. Given that from all of the comments that everybody has made, including including what's in the report, cooperation on technology innovation is going to be really important. And I'll ask any of you for your comments on how the Energy Council and maybe working groups under the Energy Council can deal with these issues, and how do you coordinate, for example, the excellent work that you're doing and DOE is doing on PTEC, for example, from an overall EU basis. And are we off base? Is this in the report? Is this something that the Energy Council can really develop a solid working group to help coordinate all of these issues, and not excluding the bilateral relationships, obviously, that have been developed and regional by PTEC?
If I might, Ambassador, just reflect just for a minute on the importance of research for the efforts that are being done under PTEC. I will have to say that much of the work right now that's currently being done is being done by our national labs, and it's innovative and trying to deal with new technologies. And to give you an example, I think in the hydrogen area, it's the work of the national labs, our national labs, that are working with the local communities to deal with, and the technical aspects in Europe, to deal with what do we do with hydrogen? How do we transport it properly? And I have to say that area can now be expanded. And I think we are interested always in expanding wherever possible with our national labs for specific requests for cooperation. So I offer that.
If I may add here, Dick, I'm glad you raised specifically the question of technology cooperation, because I think in all of the remarks today, we have talked about the transition, we have talked about energy security and the geopolitics, and I mentioned resilience as being one of the key principles in the recovery package that was adopted, presented by the European Commission yesterday. And I think in all of these issues, technology and investment are the common, or some of the common elements in order to remain energy secure, in order to have competitive energy prices and markets. We need technology, and we need to develop some of these sectors. Ted, you mentioned hydrogen, which is one that we're looking at as well. And as we're developing new markets, new energy carriers, and the closer we can work together, the bigger the chances are for us to make sure that markets remain open and competitive. So I think there's really a key interest, certainly on the European side, in strengthening cooperation also on technology, both development of new technologies, but also how do we develop markets around it to make sure that we stay energy secure and competitive. And then again, in the international context, we've been mentioning politely different other considerations geopolitically, but also in that much broader context and beyond energy, I would see an interest in a transatlantic cooperation on these more future-looking, innovative aspects.
Thank you. And do you have anything to add on that, Frank?
I was just going to underscore the opportunity set that's really before us, and again, in this crisis situation where we find ourselves, Europe has an ambitious plan. The Director General spoke to the energy system integration, which I think is intended to harness all of these components, all of these elements, so that it optimizes both things like gas, as well as some of these new technologies and how they can be linked together. And so the component pieces to ensure that it's reliable is critically important. And technology is such a strong role to play. And DOE and Ted spoken to some of the amazing work that the national labs are doing and leading the world. So I definitely think that there would be no argument at all for us to coordinate on that.
Good. Why don't we do this? I'm looking at some of the questions that have already been submitted, and there were some very good questions. I might combine a few into sort of one question that, or maybe a couple of questions that I'll give each of you can respond to as you would like, and then maybe go to the some of our questions for the following panel. A very good question for the Director General is that, all of us have talked about the importance of LNG for Europe. But the question is, how does gas fit in to the European Green Deal? And what are the concerns, for example, in Europe of importing US LNG and, whether or not there are environmental issues that are of fracking, for example, that are going to cause any issues. So that would be one question, maybe more towards data. A second question, this has come up, well, maybe to all of you, is maybe a little more on how to deal with hybrid threats. We've talked about cyber, for example, certainly a major hybrid threat. How can we cooperate in those areas? And also another question that the Director General, you really didn't say too much about dependence on dominant suppliers, but am I correct? And basically, to some extent, answering the question that when you talk about competitive and transparent markets, that underlying that is to eliminate any abuses by dominant suppliers. So those are three areas. Let me just start with data on the LNG point, and if you want to say anything more about competitive and transparent markets, and then maybe to all three of you on how we can cooperate on hybrid threats.
Thank you very much for those good questions. If I start with the question of gas and LNG and the role in the European energy mix, we have in our energy mix in Europe now natural gas plays a very, very important role. It's more than a third of our energy consumption, so we are reliant on gas as part of our energy mix. We are going to remain reliant on gas for the foreseeable future. There is no intention to phase out gas over the next 10 years or over any foreseeable future, but we do hope to move both towards cleaner gas, decarbonized gas. Hydrogen has been mentioned as one energy carrier, but also other forms of decarbonization with the carbon capture, for example, as a technology that we're also looking at. So for the foreseeable future, gas will remain an important energy source for the European Union. And what we're looking at is, others have mentioned as well, infrastructure, both the infrastructure we have, but also how do we make sure that infrastructure will be ready for the changes in the gas consumption for decarbonized gas or for hydrogen. I think Ted mentioned the same issue as one that we're looking at. So I think it's important to look at this question of the role of gas in our energy mix, look at it over the longer term, because it's clear the closer we get to 2050, to the climate neutrality of our economy, well, then the role of gas will be much smaller than it is today. But that's 2050, that's 30 years from now. The question is, how do we get there? And as I said, for the foreseeable future, I see gas as an important energy source for the European Union. Also, as part of the transition out of coal, some of our member states have fairly high shares of coal in their energy mix. And if you shift from coal to natural gas, you already see a very significant savings in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And there are other advantages as well, of course. In that context, in recognition of the importance of gas in our energy mix, indeed, the question of competitive markets, of having different sources of supply and not being dependent on one dominant supplier, as you put it, is extremely important. And there, I would like to point to the developments in the European market over the last decade, where I think everyone who works on energy policy will remember the crisis in 2009 and what that brought with it, including the issue of gas supply and the gas transition through Ukraine, and the number of measures that have been taken by Europe and by Europe with its partners like the United States since then. So if you compare our energy mix and our energy security now to then, there's a significant shift in the sense that we have diversified supply, including by US LNG, which has become an important source for us, but also by investing both in LNG terminals, but also in more infrastructure to have different sources of supply of natural gas as well. So in other words, we have gone from this complete dependence to a much lower level of dependence, to a diversification, and therefore also to better prices. We've of course also used our antitrust instrument to directly address the concern about abuse of dominant position by one supplier of gas, Gazprom, to the European market, and has managed to bring changes into the system around the contracts there. And then we have regulated, we've got the gas directive and the changes there to ensure competitive markets. So a lot has happened there to diversify, to give us a higher degree of security of supply and better and more competitive markets as a result of that. So that's the overall situation. It's a question of the security of supply and the diversification. And then you raise the issue of environmental considerations in relation to LNG. And I'm glad you asked the question, because what you will hear in the European debate is an increasing number of questions around the sustainability of different energy sources. Their views are divided on some. I think Frank mentioned nuclear as an important and clean energy supply also for the European Union. There are some discussions around how do we deal with that, and that discussion is also looking to LNG and to the sustainability of fracking and to the different sourcing. On this issue, I think the key point is that we have a close cooperation, a close dialogue on how do we address that? How do we respond to the concerns? How do we ensure that our sources of supply, that there's transparency around production, that we work off the same data? I think it will be important there to have a good dialogue, both at government level, US, EU, Energy Council, but also the different working groups and at our levels, but also, of course, a close cooperation with industry to see, well, what can be done, for example, to address methane emissions, which is a specific concern. So the closer the dialogue and the closer the cooperation, I think the more will we be able to address the legitimate concerns around the sustainability in that context. And also therefore ensure that both the transparency of markets, but also the stability of markets and pricing.
Let me just add that when talking about carbon neutrality goals and what the role of gas may have by 2050, it will also be important to see what the environmental footprint of gas is at that point. And if progress is made in some of the areas that we talk about, that could become potentially almost a carbon neutral fuel if the right steps are taken. Let me ask maybe if your two colleagues have anything they want to add to that, and then just quickly any ideas on how we can cooperate on hybrid issues like cyber, for example.
Yep. If I might, Mr. Ambassador, let me just quickly talk about the abuse of dominance in the energy markets. The one thing I'd like to point out where there has been tremendous cooperation already with the EU is on foreign investment. The EU has adopted really good regulations and are beginning the process of implementing them in various countries. And the U.S. has been cooperating around Europe with many of these countries individually, based on what has been laid out from Brussels. So we think that has been really a success story, but needs to be continued to in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything on the hybrid issues, Frank?
Yeah. I just wanted to point out that in the Secretary Pompeo has spoken to this issue, and I think it's worth underscoring. So what we're identifying is we anticipate that there is going to be the digitalization of all things, including of energy, creates new vulnerabilities, and it creates new access points for hybrid malign action. And one of the things that he announced is what we're doing is we're in the context of 5G and some of the communications, we're requiring that all of our diplomatic facilities follow a clean path, so that it avoids going through Chinese systems, because as we know, their intelligence, their companies, private sector companies, are still required to comply with the party's intelligence mandates. And so that's one effort. And so the broader comment is, if we know that there is a threat of vulnerability for going through certain access points, we're encouraging parties to not open those vulnerabilities up. Let's avoid them, find alternative means. And European companies are some of the world leaders in this space, and there's plenty of ways that we can work together to avoid increasing the probability of hybrid threats.
Let me go to our. Thank you very much, Frank, and let me go to our next panel. Before doing so, I just want to make one quick point on nuclear, and there have been a lot of questions on nuclear. Obviously, nuclear is a controversial issue both in Europe and in the United States. But what there does seem to be commonality, and I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but commonalities in the comments, is that it makes sense to do what we can to develop new, safer nuclear technologies, such as small modular reactors. Hopefully that can be done, and maybe to work together on standards, on licensing, and best practices, and so forth in that area. And that would obviously be a huge benefit with respect to emissions, but also from the security of both national security of the US, the security of the European Union from a proliferation standpoint, and not leaving everything to the Russians and Chinese. So I just wanted to emphasize that point. Okay, let's go to the panel. We have, technically we have 10 minutes left, but we're going to go, if everybody agrees, to 9:30. And let me start by asking Klaus Dieter whatever overall comments you have on what you've heard, may have on what you've heard. But I'd also like to get, and this is based on some of the discussion on March 5th, when you were tremendously helpful on our last workshop, and that is the importance or unimportance of US investment and US financing. We do have that opportunity to do that now under our legislation, and that if I remember right, you commented, well, Europe really doesn't need it. I would say, any additional co-financing helps make projects more viable. But also, if the U.S., a lot of people say, well, why does the U.S. even care? Why U.S. says a lot of stuff, but then they never do anything. Well, here's a chance to do something tangible. So I would appreciate your, any comments you might have on that as well.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Morningstar, Dick. And let me give you first my impression from the discussion so far. And I must say that I'm very much encouraged when I was listening to the Director General and the two Assistant Secretary, Bannon and Garish. because what they said is already framing the cooperation, and they have raised so many issues that are there where we can work together to the mutual benefit of the United States and the European Union, and more particularly its member states. And I think what is absolutely needed is that we rescale a bit the governance of this cooperation. As you have rightly said, Dick, it is a pity that we do not have had now almost for 18 months the US-EU Energy Council. I think that is something that has to give the inputs and also the incentives. You mentioned the installation, the establishment of real working groups with real concrete tasks and mandates. And I think that's the way forward. And we have seen in the first round of discussions, how many issues do we have in common? So starting from infrastructure, over the sourcing of energy, the sustainability, the trade issues that are related. You mentioned the carbon border adjustment and these kind of things. These need to be addressed in a very strong bilateral cooperation and discussion, in order not to be surprised then by some bad developments. Now, on the US and the possibility of financing, and of course we are welcoming very much the $1 billion that you want to invest. And I also think that the investment in Central and Southeast part of Europe is the right geographical area. I mean, we know when you look at the development of the energy systems there, they are still lagging behind. And I think we need to come with common efforts in order to bring them over time at the same level as the rest of the European Union. We have tried this, and we still do, by promoting the most important infrastructure projects. And Assistant Secretary Penn has mentioned some in Bulgaria. Very, very important, not only for diversification, but also, of course, politically also for the interconnection of different member states, be it Greece, Bulgaria, and then also Romania, Hungary. We have also, and that was also mentioned by Assistant Secretary Garish, we have the Baltic synchronization, so the desynchronization from the Russian and the Belarusian grid and synchronization with the European power network. This is something that is absolutely vital and crucial, and the EU alone is investing more than €1 billion in this exercise. So there are, of course, a lot of interesting areas. Now, the real question now is, in what do we invest? I think that one should discuss more deeply what are the areas in which we should invest for these countries, because I don't believe that investing only in natural or liquefied gas infrastructure, that this is the sustainable way forward. I think that also these countries have to be brought closer to the new technologies, to the technologies that allows also those countries to develop into a cleaner future, to be part of the energy transition that we are undertaking also with the Green Deal. This also means investing in technologies, doing this together so we can develop it together. And that is then not only something that you can use in those areas that might have a multiple use even back in the US and in other parts of the European Union. And this also links to the attraction for private investors. I think we should not pretend that by public money, be it from the state budget, US budget, be it from national budgets or EU budget, that will not make the case. We need private investors, and I think we should also bring them at a very early stage on board. And when I talk about Central and Southeastern Europe, I also include the Balkans. I think Frank has also mentioned that. That is also, in my view, a part where the US and the European Union should work closely together with others, of course, energy community, and also the World Bank is very active there. But what we see there currently happening is going into the wrong directions, because they are getting South Korean and Chinese capital to build coal-fired power plants. So that's really the worst case that you can imagine for that region. And here, again, we should not go into a dogma whether natural gas is good or bad. I'm totally with the Director General that natural gas has a role to play. And that's last what I'm saying, I put it normally in a narrative like saying, why do we even raise the question of the future of natural gas? Natural gas is there. It has a huge share in the energy mix. If we want to change that, and I say we want to change it, we have to develop the alternatives. And only if the alternatives, be it more renewable resources, be it renewable gases, only then, when we have these alternatives ready and in volumes that we need for our energy system in Europe, then we will replace natural gas by these other carriers. So for me, there is not even a question, what is the role of natural gas? It will play its role as it does until we replace it by cleaner carriers. And that's what we try to do. And this is not something from one day to the other. And therefore, we are trying to reach out also on the global level to find partners to develop these things together with us, be it in the offshore wind side, be it in the renewable gases side. Hydrogen was mentioned here, be it on the digitalization or also on the more, as you rightly pointed to, the hybrid threats elements, because that will come automatically with the digitalization.
Thank you very much, Klaus-Dieter, for those extensive comments. Just one, and great comments, just one point that I would make on the Energy Council, which you raised. Yeah, the meetings have to take place, but to me, the key is not the meetings of principles. That's important because it gives guidance and so on, and they do have to take place. But I think getting the working groups really up and going and operating is maybe the most important thing that can be done in the near term. Having said that, let me turn to Chris Smith, and you're representing the private sector from Cheniere, and obviously very much interested in gas markets. How do you assess what you've heard? What do you think you and the private sector, Cheniere and the private sector, can do in working with the Commission and with the U.S. And improving the environmental footprint, and in making and what can be done to make a success, and even more of a success, of LNG as an alternative source in Europe?
Well, thanks so much for the question, Ambassador Mount Morningstar, and also just to you and all your colleagues at the Atlantic Council for putting together not only this event, but also this terrific report. I mean, this is the thing that the Atlantic Council does so well, and helps us as a company that's trying to steer capital into useful ways. It helps us understand the land. I also appreciate very much hearing the comments of the Director General Jorgensen and Dr. Borchardt, and also the two Assistant Secretaries, Garish and Fannin, in the lead up. A lot of horsepower, certainly in the comments this morning, And a couple things struck me that I guess I'd like to sort of lean into. One, it's encouraging to see some of the commonality of thought and of emphasis that we heard from senior officials in the EU and in the United States. We heard, if you listen closely enough, you heard, some areas of emphasis were a little bit different on both sides. But overall, I think that really speaks to this strong relationship between the United States and Europe. And one of the reasons why is we think as a private sector company about how we deploy our capital, that over the long term, even though we go through periods of difficulty, of conflict, we're certainly going through a very difficult period right now with all of us dealing with this COVID challenge. But the long-term business fundamentals that tie the United States and Europe together remain very, very strong. And that's something that we remain encouraged about in terms of what is the long-term relationship between a company like Cheniere and buyers in Europe. Another thing that I guess I'd like to kind of point out and perhaps comment on is some of the comments that Director General Jorgensen made around not only around LNG, and if you look at all of the ways that our two regions are tied together, there's when this obviously focused on energy, but within energy there's a lot of different ways that our two societies can cooperate. But LNG is really coming to the forefront because we see this as one of the areas where things have really changed dramatically over the last several years, with LNG imports to Europe doubling over the last few years, and the majority of that delta, that change, coming from the United States. Secondly, one of the comments or the areas that Director General Jorgensen really focused on was this area of environmental sustainability, and that's one of the questions that you got from your audience. Encouraging to hear the comments not only from the Director General, but also from Dr. Borchardt in your comments just now, about the fact that as we think about policies and this playing field is evolving as we speak, the focus really needs to be on the data, on ensuring that we're taking steps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and on real actions. All right, so a couple things I'll focus on just very briefly. We see this issue of deep decarbonization, of reducing of greenhouse gas emissions, as a competitive advantage for natural gas and for LNG in the medium and in the long term. But importantly, the things that we can do right now, right today, are critical when you look at the challenges of climate. So ensuring that we are displacing coal, and we know through our modeling that the benefits you get right now today through using natural gas instead of coal is very, very important for reaching our climate goals. But also, as the largest buyer of natural gas in the United States, we at Cheniere are in a position to work with our suppliers to help ensure that right now we're putting in place good methods and good practices and procedures for reducing fugitive methane emissions, which we know is going to be a key component to long-term sustainability of natural gas and meeting our shared climate goals. So overall, perhaps I'll pause there. I'm kind of interested in the kind of question back and forth here, but we do very much see Europe as being an important market for us, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Chris. Let me ask you just one quick question, and then go to Eugene Howard. On the question of objective and transparent data, which is going to be critically important to a carbon border adjustment, to make sure that LNG, for example, wherever it's from, is treated in an equivalent way to piped gas from Russia or from anywhere else. Do you have any thoughts on how to obtain that kind of objective data?
Yeah, well, listen, we're going to do what we can, and we're going to control the things that we can control here as a company. I'll make two observations. First, I just mentioned that we're the largest buyer of natural gas in the United States. We are actually in our second year of convening all of our suppliers to look at better transparency of data so that we can more accurately reflect the true picture of LNG from the United States. When buyers are buying LNG from the U.S., you're buying the reliability of our company, you're buying the reliability of our suppliers, the supplier gas, but you're also buying the entirety of the regulatory environment here in the United States, which does put a priority on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, on clean production, on making sure that we've got the right processes in place to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But there's always more that we can do. So first, we're going to make sure that we're doing everything we can to work with like-minded suppliers to minimize greenhouse gas emissions, which is in the long-term interest of our company, of our suppliers, but also of our buyers. And secondly, we're really working on the modeling that looks at what is the overall full life cycle emissions of LNG. There's work that's been done by the Department of Energy, by the national laboratories that looks at these life cycle analyses. That's based on a lot of assumptions and the fact that we can go in and get real data to underlie those assumptions, to improve the engineering estimates, but also in Europe, but in other markets as well, work with our buyers, work with the individuals or the entities that are actually using natural gas, so we can actually understand what the market looks like in the end market. It helps us to build a more robust picture of what life cycle emissions for natural gas or for LNG really look like. And it's our strong belief that if we can not only build an accurate picture through accurate modeling and accurate data, but also do those things that we can to influence and lower emissions in the upstream and in our own facilities, that we're going to be in a position to compete for the long run and ensure that economies that are looking to meet their greenhouse gas emissions have more and more options to get to their target, including LNG from the United States.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, we're getting close to the end, and I've incorporated a lot of the questions that people have asked in my comments and questions. So I want to go, and it may be our last set of comments, to Eugene Howard from the European Investment Bank. And I would ask you two questions. I know your area is electrification. So one, I would ask you to comment on the importance of electrification, how we can cooperate on projects like desynchronization. I know that the US has been heavily involved in the BMIP project, Baltic Energy something or other, which stresses desynchronization from the Russian grid. And I would also ask you if you can comment on whether the US and the DFC, for example, can cooperate with the EIB on some kind of matching basis on gas projects and gas infrastructure projects, and how EIB would ultimately define projects which abate carbon emissions to offsets from the projects, and whether is it really realistic that EIB can be involved in gas projects and involved with U.S. financing agencies?
Thank you, Ambassador. I think maybe I'll start with the second part of your question, because I think that it's a longer answer. The EIB adopted its energy and lending policy in November. And it was designed to focus the bank's limited public resources towards the projects that contribute most to the long-term decarbonization objectives of Europe. Now, in the power sector, the phasing out of fossil fuels was accommodated by lowering the bank's emissions performance standard, existing performance standard, from 550 to 250 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. It's a tough standard and probably could only really be met with power generation from natural gas combined with heat using the best available CHP technologies, or when natural gas is combined with carbon capture and storage or blended with low carbon gases. It's also meant to accommodate hybrid systems, mostly off-grid or mini-grid, which might include a combination of diesels and renewables. So that covers us on the power sector, where we we are more or less now focused for power generation that still uses fossil fuels. When we talk about other gas infrastructure, the energy lending policy made it quite clear we're phasing that out, with some caveats. And I think that the caveats being that first, of course, we will continue to support the low carbon, the integration of low carbon gases in the gas networks in Europe. And so projects that facilitate that are still on our radar, and we will be actively looking to support those types of projects. Also, because this is quite a significant step for the bank, that really could only be managed with a phasing period, in which we have agreed that the bank can continue to approve gas infrastructure projects that were already under appraisal by the bank when the energy lending policy was adopted. And these include projects of energy community interest, the PECI, projects, and in the list of the mutual interest, the PMIs. And in addition, the bank is authorized to continue to approve gas infrastructure projects in the fourth PCI, projects of common interest list, that are co-financed with EU money. So that more or less describes the scope in which our gas lending can be accommodated or co-financed. So in a sense, this limits it to within the next approvals within the next 2 years, and under one of those circumstances. Apart from that, there is much more limited scope for gas infrastructure to be financed by the bank, either in Europe or outside of Europe at this time. Our energy lending policy is really focusing on energy efficiency first as a key principle for decarbonization. Second, we look towards, well, in the energy efficiency, we're looking at a massive increase in renovation of buildings in the EU, as well as the support of building standards that go beyond the regulatory requirements. Renewable energies, of course, are still an area for a lot of financing in common, where projects will be taking, I think, bigger risk now, larger market risk that we have to accommodate. It's not very easily accommodated by the bank's lending structures currently. And of course, research development, carbon capture and storage, hybridization. There's many areas where in the technology and innovation space where there are still opportunities for financing that we could move forward together. And then, of course, electricity networks in their entirety, including many of the new technologies in demand side management and use of new uses of the systems, of frequency controls, to allow and enable further and faster penetration, the deeper penetration of renewables into the electricity grids. So I think that more or less can cover what we can do in this space. Nuclear, I think we talked about it earlier, but nuclear is something the bank has not changed its policies on. But given looking at the history of the bank, we've only had very few security investments in nuclear security, and I think our last nuclear power plant must have been financed prior to 1990. So although it's not a policy issue, in practical terms, we haven't been financing very many. Your second, sorry, you had the second part of the question was?
The second part of the question.
Oh yes, about digitalization.
Electrification. Unfortunately, I think we're going to be kicked off the air in a minute or so.
But I think I covered that already. So we certainly are very, very much involved in the digitalization and smartening of grids in order to provide the flexibility and security that we need.
Right. I wish we had more time to talk about electrification, because I think cooperation in that area and in the things that you were talking about, resilience, Hybrid issues like cyber would be tremendously important. Artificial intelligence, digitalization, all those things are things we can work on. I think we're going to, unfortunately, we could go on for hours. And maybe we're trying to fit too much into this, but I think it has been an excellent 90 minutes with fantastic participants, the Director General, the 2 Assistant Secretaries, and our terrific panel. There were terrific questions. I wish I could have gotten to more of them, but I did try to incorporate them in my comments. So hopefully you'll continue to attend Atlantic Council virtual events. We've had many and we'll continue to have many. And so let's give a virtual round of applause to all of our participants. And so I'm going to say goodbye to all of you, to thank all of you, and to stay healthy. And hopefully at some point in the not too distant future, we'll be having in-person events as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dick.